Okay. Hi, my name is Josie Lesage, and I am, as said, a graduate student at UC Santa Cruz in the Environmental Studies Department. And today I'm going to be talking to you guys about seed banks in restored, reference, and degraded coastal prairies near Santa Cruz, and primarily the seed banks of native and exotic forbs. And before I get into the meat of my talk, I'm going to give you kind of an outline of some of my dissertation projects. The first being a resampling of gray hazes, fence lines, paired grazed and ungrazed grasslands that he did in 2000 and 2001, and resampling those. But the main reason I'm bringing this up is because I'd like to send out a broad call to all of you in the audience. If you know of any 5 or more, 5 years or longer grassland community composition data sets, and you are interested in collaborating with me on looking at the impacts of interannual and intra-annual precipitation on grassland community composition, I would love to hear from you. So I'll have my email up at the end and get into contact with me, and we'll talk about collaborating on a climate project. That's a climate project. Okay, and so then the project I'm going to be talking to you about today is a comparison of the Forb seed banks in reference restored and degraded coastal prairies. And so, for those of you who haven't been out to the northern coastal prairies, they are, let's see if I can get this to work. They're basically within 5 miles of the coast, along the California coast. They have a much higher richness than interior valley grasslands. They're generally much wetter, and they have a lot of native forbs, and especially a lot of native annual forbs. And so, they're really threatened because who doesn't want to live on the coast, right? A lot of the coastal soils they grow in are also great for agriculture, so a lot of coastal prairies have been converted over time into agricultural land. And so we've lost a lot of diversity, and there's not a lot of remaining coastal prairie, but what is there still has its problems with exotic grasses. So even in the best coastal prairies, these are a couple of coastal prairies in Santa Cruz, and this is the percent native cover. Even in these best case intact coastal prairies near Santa Cruz, we still only get between 60–70% cover of natives. And so restoration is aiming to return degraded prairies, often out of ag land, right? One-time ag land that's being restored back into coastal prairie, is aiming to get to that 60% native cover. And the best way to do that, or maybe the fastest way to do that, is to plant perennial species that take up space quickly, right? So I'm really interested in restoration, and if you restore and you want to get this cover going, you need to create a self-replicating system, and that's where the seed bank comes in. So if you are restoring grassland species, you put them in the ground, you hope that they'll produce seed, and then that seed will form a seed bank that will allow the prairie to continue after you've finished your project. Okay, so, coastal prairie forbs. I'm interested in the forbs. I didn't study the grasses in this project, A, because they're a little difficult to identify when they're that big, but also because the forbs are what really contributes richness to this system, and there's a much higher diversity of them. So, they also, as was mentioned in the talks prior, the exotic grasses, for the most part, have short-lived transient seed banks, whereas the forbs have this much longer-lived seed bank that I might expect to see more readily. And that's actually true of both the native forbs and potentially the Mediterranean invasive forbs that have come over. There are a lot of native forbs. A lot of them are endemic. I was hoping when I started this project to find tons of really cool endemic forbs. Spoiler, I didn't. But native annual forbs are often neglected in restoration projects, and so as I was saying, with the perennial forbs, you want to restore a grassland, you want to get this cover up as quickly as possible to compete with the exotic annual grass, and so you plant a lot of perennial species, right? You plant a lot of things that will grow and take up space quickly. And so I was really curious when I started this project to see if we look at the seed bank, do we see that we're developing a perennial seed bank instead of an annual seed bank? So a seed bank with perennial species in it. And so this was exploratory work. I have very few sites, but I still had some hypotheses. And so we'll walk through these. My first hypothesis was that if we compare a reference, a restored, and a degraded grassland, the reference site would have more native species than it would have exotic species in its seed bank, right? And then the restored seed bank, the seed bank of a restored site would be somewhere in the middle, and the degraded grassland would have a lot of exotic species in its seed bank and few native species. Okay. The second hypothesis I wanted to test at these sites was that there would be more native annuals in our reference site, and there would be a lot more native perennials in the restored site, and then there wouldn't be very many leaves at all on the degraded site. So basically, I wanted to find out whether we are creating a native perennial seed bank, but not generating that annual seed bank that I'm talking about. Okay, so even though, so this work was exploratory, but I still had some hypotheses, and I went out to my field sites to collect seed banks. So this right here is Santa Cruz, that's San Jose, San Francisco would be like up here. I collected from reference grassland at Año State Park. Franklin Point is one of the nicest intact, highly diverse grasslands remaining near Santa Cruz. So it was a great site to hopefully find annual Forbs. And then I have 2 restoration sites. These restoration sites are ex-agricultural land. They used to be a Brussels sprouts farm, and a strawberry farm. And so both sites have been tilled. There's probably no native seed bank left there, and the restoration for both sites occurred between 5 and 3 years ago. And so they've introduced a lot of perennial species to both of these sites. And then finally, I also took soil samples from degraded grassland next to the restoration site at Younger Lagoon Reserve, just to see whether we can see an increase, or if there's actually still some native seeds in the degraded grassland. So my soil cores were really shallow, they were rather wide. In total, I collected about 6 kilograms of soil from each of these sites. Because I collected them in September, that would be before the first rain, after all the seeds had set, I'm collecting the transient seed bank and the persistent seed bank. So both of those would have shown up in my samples. So when you collect soil, you plate them out onto sterile media, and then you water it, and you wait, and they grow. And I also stratified my seed bank samples in order to try to encourage native germination, and I put liquid smoke, like barbecue liquid smoke, on top of them as well to see if I could stimulate native germination that way. And so, let's find out what grew. As you can see, this by the way, you can see there's a lot of grass that grew. I just flipped that back. Yeah. I was not going to identify all of those and count them. All right. So this first graph is showing you the native and exotic species richness. So this graph would be richness, and this graph is the abundance, and this is for the full 6 kilograms, 30 samples of soil from each site. And so we have our reference grassland, the restoration sites, and the degraded grassland. And really what I want you to pull away from both of these graphs is that it doesn't matter where you are, exotic species dominate, right? There's a much greater richness of exotic species, even at the reference site, than there is of native species anywhere. And I also want to point out this insanely huge bar right here. How many of you guys have ever dealt with Hyssop strife? Yeah, a couple of you maybe? Okay, so that was about 400 seeds out of that bar, which I thought was very interesting, but it clearly shows that I need to talk to somebody at state parks about what's going on there. So if we look at our ratios, my hypothesis was that this bar was going to be mostly natives, and this bar was going to be very small. And we actually see the flip, right, where the ratios, if you look at the raw ratio, this is 1 to 3, and this is 1 to slightly less than 2, right? That's not what I had hypothesized. I had hypothesized that this bar would be much bigger and this bar would be very short. But so we see that the ratio of natives is really, or the number of natives is really the same in all sites, but that at the reference site, there's more space for a high diversity of exotic species. And so my hypothesis for this, and I haven't tested it, but this will be hopefully future work, is that what's happening in this degraded site, and possibly at this restoration site, is there's still a lot of exotic annual grass. And that thick thatch layer is actually reducing the diversity of exotic forbs that can show up. And so here at this reference site, a lot more exotic forbs can grow because they don't have to compete with as much exotic grass. There's a lot more native grass there with bunches and space in between. Okay, so now that we've talked a little bit about the native and exotic species, I really want to focus in on the native species and do that annual perennial comparison. And so this is the richness and abundance of just the native species. In the green bar we have our annuals, and in the yellow bar we have our perennial species. And this is like where things get exciting. In our reference grassland, we have slightly more annuals and slightly fewer perennials. You might say it's about 50-50, right? But then you look at these restoration sites, and look at that. They've definitely got more perennial species than they do annuals. The abundance numbers are a little all over the place. Watsonville Wetlands Watch clearly did a great job of putting a perennial seed bank in place. Yay! I'll tell you right now, this is mostly Caniza or it's horseweed for these annuals, so it doesn't really count too much. But really, we do see that restoration sites are doing a great job of putting perennials into the seed bank. But maybe the kind of flip side of that, if you want to look at the negative side, the glass half empty, is that we're forgetting to put the annual forbs into the restoration sites. And especially for coastal prairies where annual forbs are like why you go out to see the prairie, right? In the springs, it's beautiful flashes of color. Okay. And then this is again just showing the ratios that we've really built up the perennials in the restored site seed banks. Okay. I'm sure that some of you want to know which annual forbs I found, and this is perhaps a little disappointing, but it's a lot of weeds, right? It's a lot of things that maybe we wouldn't even consider like annual forbs. They're annual forbs by definition, but you can see them, in a crack in the parking lot kind of thing, right? But so there were some one red moon showed up at restoration site one day. But yeah, it's a lot of weedy species that make it into these seed banks. And so I just want to do some quick conclusions, which is what I've been saying with those last couple slides. But the ratio of natives to exotics was actually greatest in the degraded seed bank, and we think that that might be because of the thick thatch layer of grasses. This trend was driven by the number of exotics, not by the number of natives. So it's not that reference sites had lots of native plants, it's actually that degraded sites just didn't have very much diversity at all, period. We also saw that restored sites are returning some of the perennial seed bank, but that they are not successfully getting any natives in there, which is sort of the flip side. And then finally, I didn't see very many native annuals at all, and for those that I did see, they were mostly the weedy species that I probably could have gotten out of soil seed banks from many different places. So future directions, what I think might be interesting is, well, first of all, I'm going to up my replication a lot. This was really a pilot study. So I'm hoping to find quite a few restored and reference sites to make these comparisons at. And I'm hoping to find restored sites that have been restored for maybe like 10 years, so that they've had a longer time to develop their seed banks, so that we can see how things look in a more mature seed bank, right? If you've only been putting seeds into there for 2 or 3 years, the results might look a little different from a more mature seed bank. And then finally, if anyone has ever done a lot of restoration with native annual forbs, and you want me to come sample your land, I don't know how many people plant native annual forbs in their restoration projects. My impression has been very few people do it because it's not a guaranteed return on your effort, and it doesn't result in a lot of cover quickly. And so with that, I'd really like to thank the UC Reserve System, State Parks, and Watsonville Wetlands Watch for letting me sample their land. This is me hanging out with a bunch of ranunculus, it's great. My advisor, Karen Holl, my counting assistant, Paul, was so great. There were so many seeds to count, or seedlings to count, and then all of my lab. And with that, there's my email in case you want to tell me about your data sets or your annual forb restoration site, and I'll take any questions. Thank you.